Um, so you've been a Christian probably 8 or 9 years, roughly now.
Yeah.
Has it always been plain sailing? Has life been kind of tickety boo ever since you came to know Jesus? Have you, you know, do bad things never happen to Christians, do they? It's the old saying, isn't it?
No, well, it is the old saying, but maybe it's a perception that Christians have probably put on themselves. We like to put up this front, don't we? We like to put up the picture of everything's fine and rosy. No, it's definitely not been plain sailing. I think probably one of the big things I still wrestle with is my own self-worth. And that hope that I was just talking about is, that's probably a constant struggle for me in terms of understanding that I do have a purpose and that I have that God has given me gifts and abilities to use, and the more I look around me and the more amazing people I see around me, sometimes the harder that sometimes feel that way. There's a verse in Matthew 13, or a couple of verses, a parable that Jesus tells in Matthew 13 about a guy that owns a vineyard, a guy that owns a field, and he plows his field and he plants a seed and then goes away, and in the night his enemy comes and plants weeds in and amongst all the seeds. So when they begin to grow, the wheat grows, but also in and amongst all that there is weeds. And that's very much how I feel. Probably, if we're all honest with each other, that's probably very much how our journeys go. Is that whilst Jesus is doing good stuff in us, and the more that we are surrendered to Him, the more that He will do. Also, in and amongst that, there's still the flesh part of us, the worldly part of us that grows in and amongst that. And so I think for a big part of that for me is just the way I view myself and my own self-worth of looking at myself and saying, God does have a purpose for me and He can use me. So that's probably a big struggle that I have with myself. But also there's been some rocky patches as well. So as I said at the start, I'm married, and when Gemma fell pregnant with Ezra, that was a pretty difficult period in our life. From the very first scan, we were told, prepare yourselves for the worst. We were told that Ezra might not even make it to term. We were told that if he does, the likelihood of him being born with some sort of syndrome or genetic problem is very high. And we went on to have, I think it was like 15 or 16 scans altogether. And none of them were happy, joyful, let's go and look at this blob on the screen scans. It was very much medical and very much they were looking for things that were going to be wrong. And that was a very, very difficult period in both of our lives, and very much a period where I very much ran to God with every decision that I made, with every thought that I had. I just ran to God, and thankfully he came along. He was about 7.5 weeks early. He was absolutely tiny, so he was 3.6 pounds when he was born, and then he dropped down to 3 pounds within the first 24 hours, and he just had a couple of small breathing problems, but he was very, very healthy. He did about 6 weeks, I think it was, in an incubator, just because of how small he was. So they were just allowing him to grow and allowing his lungs to catch up with the fact that he was now in the world and wasn't in mummy's womb. But he was very much healthy, very much happy little boy, and now he terrorizes the house. And so, but it was a very, very difficult period in our lives, but very much a period where we felt God closest.
You mentioned before, Matty, that you had a job in retail, a bit of a dead-end job. I think you mentioned before that you work somewhere else now. What whilst you're in Burnley, what did you kind of get up to there?
Yeah, so God, again, just an awesome, in my own life, an awesome story of how God transformed me, really. So that, like I say, and this is no disrespect to anybody that works in retail, but I felt, for me, it was very much, I loved it in the sense that I got to talk to people every day, but it was very much, I wasn't going to achieve anything, and I didn't love the job. And so I was very, very much quite unhappy. And once I'd had this transformation, I was very unhappy with where I was at, and just wanted to better myself, really. And so God took me on a bit of a journey. So for someone who didn't think that I was ever going to accomplish anything, and I didn't do terrible in my GCSEs, but I didn't do great either. I went on to do to university. I studied at university for a couple of years, which was a big thing for me, because I just never thought I would be at university. And then I worked as, the best way to describe it is probably a careers advisor, a careers coach, for a company called Positive Footprints. It was a company set up by a Christian lady from our church, and it was all about giving children the opportunity to understand what their skills and qualities are, to understand that they do have skills and qualities and that they're fit somewhere in the world, and helping them on that sort of career journey. But incredibly, God brought me on this journey of, when I moved back to Burnley from Cornwall, and I'd made this promise that I was never going to go back on this estate. God, it's funny how God has a great sense of humour, because I met Gemma, and Gemma was working on the estate, on the same estate, and she lived on the estate doing youth work. And so God pulled me back onto this estate, but it was sort of 5 or 6 years later, when I was a completely different person with a completely different mentality. And so we were able to have this thriving youth ministry and kids work, where we were seeing probably 100 kids come through the door every week. We were telling them about Jesus. And from there, things kind of just snowballed really into a church plant. We set up a charity. Jem was employed by the Methodist circuit in Burnley, and they were very, very gracious and very, very supportive of everything that we were doing. And they allowed Jem to use a lot of her hours sort of doing this work on this estate, which was just awesome. And so after about 2 or 3 years, we set up a charity which helped to support the building on the estate. And what's amazing was this church was slap bang in the middle of the estate. It couldn't get, probably geographically, it couldn't get any more in the middle of the estate than what it was. And it was a nice big building. And there was a Methodist congregation there that were an elderly congregation, and that had struggled to connect with the estate. And so on a Sunday morning, they would all arrive at church, and then they would lock the door from the inside. They would have the church service and then leave. And that was because it was terrorised a little bit by the kids on the estate. And you can imagine the kind of kids that they were, just really naughty, unruly, lots of them not in mainstream education. And they just used to terrorise the estate. And so when Jem arrived on the scene, and then a couple of years later I arrived on the scene, and there was this team building around us, the church started to become their own building. They started to recognise it as, actually, these guys are for us, and they don't want to just be another person telling us off. They actually want to try and help us, and they give us stuff and they help us out. And so from there, this family work started. We started to work with a couple of families on the estate, and it got to the stage where on a Sunday morning, I had a car full of people, Gemma had a car full of people, and one of our friends, Anne, she also had a car full of people. And we would drive them to the other side of town, to my home church, and we would go to church there and come back. And it just got to a stage where we just felt, surely there's something different we can do. And so there was various conversations that took place, and lots of prayer, and we ended up planting this church on the estate, and in the middle of this estate that I'd grown up on. And what was awesome was some of the parents that were coming in were some of the people that I'd grown up with, and some of the people that I used to hang around with, and they were seeing this change in me, and they were bringing their kids along to our kids' work and youth groups. And we were extremely blessed in the sense that we saw lots of people give their lives to Jesus, and lots of people have their lives transformed by Jesus. And we were just able to help people out and just to serve on that estate. It was just an awesome honour and a great privilege. And so the church is still going now. I think it's 4 or 5 years old. Obviously, in the times that we're in, a little bit more difficult, but they meet on Zoom, which has been really great for us, because it means we've been able to reconnect with them on a weekly basis, which has been lovely. to sort of get that reconnection since moving away from Burnley.
Yeah, so you just mentioned then that you've moved away from Burnley now, so maybe if you just share with us for a minute about kind of what you do now, where you work, where you're at.
Yeah, so I work, excuse me, I work at Capernwray Bible School. I'm the Dean of Students. I've taken over from Ian Ellishaw, who I'm sure some people watching may know. I think everybody I know around here at least knows one Ellishaw, so they're a popular family around here. So yeah, I'm Dean of Students, and my wife Gemma is Outreach Coordinator at Capernwray Bible School. So we live on site and we work here as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. So final question, Matty. You know, we're living in some strange and funny days. You've spoken a little bit about the hope that you have. Can you maybe give us some advice or hope for these days and looking forward? Because it, you know, I don't know about you, but it kind of feels like Corona's all we've ever lived with now. Yeah. It's nearly a year with it, and some people may just think, where's the hope?
Yeah. It is, very uncertain times, I guess, and difficult times to be living in, and very strange times. I think, again, if you'd have told all of us a year ago that this time next year we'll all be living in our own homes and the only shops will be able to go to are supermarkets, I think everyone would have fell about laughing. But yeah, such is the times that we live in, and I think it's easier when we're going through what we're going through and we're having to isolate and we're having to spend time at home and not see our loved ones and our family and our friends and the people that we care about. And it's easy to think that God is distant from us. It's easy to see that, oh, well, God must be distant, or we must have done something wrong maybe. But I found when I read my Bible and when I look through some of the accounts in the Bible of times when the world or particular people have gone through struggles, it's usually been when the opposite. It's usually been when God is closest, and usually been when God is doing something. And so there's a few stories I look at that come to mind. And I think of sort of Moses trying to free his people, free God's people from the Egyptians. You know, it's maybe a time when God's people felt, you know, things have never been worse than ever. You know, we're driven hard, and every time Moses tries something, they add more restrictions on us, and they give us more work to do. You know, it must have been a time when God felt distant, but actually God was moving a lot to free them, and so that they wouldn't just be free for a little bit, so they couldn't escape and then be recaptured, but so that they could be free forever. And another story that comes to mind, another account that comes to mind is Joseph. You know, we take a look at Joseph's life. He was sold, and then he was made as a servant in Potiphar's house, and then he was became a prisoner. And all through that period, it could be very easily, from a human perspective, to see, you know, God's obviously abandoned me. God's obviously left me. But actually, it was the complete opposite. God was closer than ever to him, and he had found favor in God's eyes, and God was moving and moving in his life and shaping things in his own heart and in his own life. And the last one I look at is when Mary and Joseph were sort of on their way back to Bethlehem. Has Jesus. You can look at that whole period if you read through the story in Matthew. You can look through that whole period and think, from a human perspective, it's a pretty brutal period in their times. You know, they've got to travel miles and miles and miles on a donkey. She's sort of in a late stage of pregnancy. Then they have this baby in a shed, in a cave, whichever it is, surrounded by stinky, smelly animals. And then they're told one day that they've got to get up in the middle of the night and flee for their lives. And then looking back, they're told every child 2 years and under has been killed where you've just left. think of the heartache and think of the pain that they must have been in, and think of the prison that they must have felt that they were in, that they're on the run from the king. And it could have very much felt like God was very distant from them, but it was the complete opposite. God was very much close to them, and he was very much moving in those circumstances. And so I think a hope for us in the here and now is that, you know, things do look pretty bleak. Whenever we flick on the news, there's not just this COVID that's going on, and cases seem to be on the rise constantly, and there's constant bad news after bad news, but there's other things that are coming at us, you know, what's going on in America and various disasters in different countries, and you can just look at the news and it looks pretty bleak. But I think we can look at it with hope that actually God is closer to us than ever before. And usually in times when things look pretty bleak and we look like we're being hemmed in, God is moving in incredible ways. And I think we have that hope that we have Jesus, we carry Jesus with us. And so if you have a relationship with Jesus, if you know him personally and you've accepted into your heart, then we can have a hope that things will work out in the end, but also for the here and now, that we have this hope that actually we have an urgency to tell people about Jesus because he offers us this hope of a future and a life with him.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Matty. Thank you for everything you've shared with us. Matty has shared with us how God has changed his life, and it can be the same for you too as you watch this episode. God can completely change your life no matter what circumstances you are in. You just need to admit your need of him and desire to live for him. And so I'd really encourage you to think about that in these times, to consider Jesus, who Jesus is, and how he can completely change anybody's life. He's changed my life, he's changed Matty's life. So think about that, and perhaps get in touch with us if you'd like to ask more questions. And what I'll just do in a moment, I'll just pray a short prayer. And if you want to come to know Jesus for yourself personally, just follow along with this prayer. So I'll just pray that now. Father God, thank you for Matty. Thank you for what he's shared, and thank you for how you've worked in his life. I thank you that you sent Jesus to this earth to bridge that gap between us and you. And I just pray, Father God, for those who are watching this episode, that they might realise their need of you and realise that they can come to you. And I just pray that they might desire to come to know you and may just accept you into their hearts and lives. So just pray for them at this time now, Father God. Amen. Amen. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Matty. Thank you for joining with us today. Thank you to all you guys at home who are watching. If you followed along with that prayer and you want to know Jesus for yourself, please do let us know, because it is such an encouragement. But we'd also love to support you by sending you a Bible, sending you study notes, things like that, because the best thing you can do, as Matty has shared, is to read God's word and to get to know who God is. So do get in touch if you've done that, or if you've got any questions or anything like that. We'd happily answer them. So thanks again for joining with us, and thanks again, Matty. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.